Hey everyone, it's Blake, and welcome in to the 411 on Wrestling Podcast. On today's episode of the podcast, we welcome back 411's Andy Perez to discuss a wild edition of AEW Dynamite. We just decided to bring Andy back because, of course, he and I talked on the last episode of the podcast about what we thought we could see from this winter is coming edition of AEW Dynamite, and sure enough, a lot of the things we talked about did not happen, but the things that actually did has the internet buzzing because Sting is in AEW now, which is funny because as we talk about, we actually mentioned that about a month ago and all the different rumors and such, thinking it would happen at Full Gear. That did not happen, but it has happened now with Sting and AEW, and we talked about maybe what that means moving forward, not only for Sting, but for AEW, and of course, the big title change, Kenny Omega winning the AEW World Title from Jon Moxley, and what that means now with Kenny Omega set to head to Impact Wrestling on Tuesday, and what it just means really for the universe as a whole in terms of the wrestling universe, and what we could see from all these potential partnerships between AEW and Impact. Of course, Impact has been working with New Japan in terms of sending some of their talent to the Super J-Cup. Lots of different possibilities, and we kind of went into what we could see from that, and really, what's the overall impact of this on the wrestling industry? What does it mean for WWE? Could we see WWE makes any changes moving forward? Lots of different things to think about here with this potential AEW and Impact Wrestling partnership, and really as a whole, just a different dynamic in terms of where things are at in the wrestling business right now, and really what it could look like once these restrictions are kind of lifted in terms of the pandemic, and could we see a lot more of this? Could it allow some of these companies to do a lot more in terms of working with each other here in the future? So lots of stuff to get into, so let's go ahead and jump into the conversation with 411's Andy Perez. All right, as promised, our guest is once again Andy Perez. He's back. Of course, we talked on the last episode of the podcast about our predictions and kind of what we expected for this winter is coming edition of AEW Dynamite. And sure enough, Andy, we nailed all of it, didn't we? We said Sting was going to come back. We said that Impact was going to be a new partner for AEW. Boy, we just got it all correct, didn't we?
Yeah, somewhat of wrestling prophets. If we had a bit of revisionist history there, we were way off base, Blake. But I think just about everybody was way off base with the show that we had last night.
Well, it's funny, and I know people who have listened to this podcast before, they remember back to the episode we did. Of course, we did on the Dissecting Dynamite. I don't remember if that was before or after Full Gear, but we brought it up on that, and we brought it up here on the podcast. We were like, all these rumors about Sting, and we're kind of half laughing, and we're kind of saying, you know what, there may be something to this. And, of course, that was about a month ago now. And it's funny, you and I laughed about it last night on the Dissecting Dynamite show, which we're going to put that link in the show notes, and I would highly suggest anyone, if you want our just immediate reaction to all this, we were just going crazy. So I would highly recommend you watch that. But we were saying, I did not think about Sting at all since that conversation we had almost a month ago, and I never thought again about this possibility. So I think you have to give it to AEW for doing it at this time. The winter is coming thing, I never tied that to Sting, not even one time did I ever think about that. Of course, what we mostly talked about was New Japan, Kenta, all that stuff. So for Sting to come out the way that he did, pretty incredible, I think, now just thinking back on it after the last time we talked about 14 hours ago.
Yeah, a little over 14 hours since we ended our coverage on Dissecting Dynamite, and I am, quite frankly, still reeling. I'm trying to get everything straight in my head. It's still coming down from the wrestling-induced high I've been experiencing, but we're going to try our best because I'm sure there are thousands of other fans out there experiencing the exact same thing. But yeah, Sting is here in AEW. Sting is All Elite, and apparently with a multi-year contract. And we've been sitting here asking ourselves, what role is he going to be in? And there was just a new article posted just minutes ago to 411mania.com. Talking about his supposed role in AEW and what we might see him do.
Yeah, it sounds like based on the article we have up there, and it's from the latest edition of the Wrestling Observer Radio, which I listen to as well. It sounds like that Sting is going to be a regular on Dynamite, so of course has the full-time multi-year contract. and that it's not going to be one of those things where he just pops up every quarter or something where he's there 4 times a year or something like that. Also, in this story, I'll just read it straight from 411. It was also noted that Sting will not be taking any bumps, and anything physical he does, it will be done safely. And the fact that Sting's debut was timed so that it would happen right before Christmas, which is, again, that's another thing I didn't even think of as we were talking in the moment, Andy, but that's another genius part of this, because if you want to sell some merch, doing this right before Christmas, that was a genius idea, as it was putting it right before the main events, as we said, before putting it before that huge match, because you knew a lot of people were probably going to turn over, and we still don't know the ratings yet, and we probably won't know this by the time we're done recording, but I think you and I have talked about it. I feel like 1 million is kind of that number they want to hit. I don't know if they will, but it's still going to be interesting to see. But really, as you look at this here, knowing that he's going to be a regular character, I know there was a little bit of people when we first saw Sting debut, it was, hey, I really hope he's not coming back and going to be someone who's out there wrestling every week, because this is the kind of stuff that we give, WWE hell for whenever they do this stuff. I never thought it was going to be that way, and it seems at least now, even if he's going to be a regular character, he's not going to be out there, challenging Kenny Omega for the title or anything. But what do you think? Just knowing maybe this, I mean, it makes sense from a business standpoint, as you and I have discussed before. They're trying to get viewers, and I think to have someone that is certainly recognizable on TNT, someone that's recognizable as a wrestling legend, and essentially someone who just came from WWE, it's a pretty significant get, and I can completely understand why they're doing it.
Yeah, I mean, you said it, talking about the merchandising, the name value that Sting brings, the branding that he brings, the merchandising that he brings. I mean, I was mentioning it to you before we started speaking, but we see that he's already front and center in some of the ticket sale advertisements for the Daily's Place shows that are upcoming, and I'm sure his merch is just flying out the door over at Pro Wrestling Tees headquarters. I'm praying for the Packers up there, because their hands are going to be bleeding by the end of the day. But yeah, when we're looking at like what role is he going to be in, I mean, looking at how it was built up to last night, and then looking at his actual appearance last night. The immediate answer is obviously, beside Darby Allin, maybe acting in that Arn Anderson role, especially with the now we know intentional similarities between the two in the past months, and just the lingering stare that he had with Darby. Of course, he had a similar stare off with Cody beforehand, but the one with Darby looks like it's the one that AEW continues to push with like online images and whatnot. So yeah, I'm very excited to see what he can bring to Darby, like what type of value he can bring to Darby as a performer, because Darby has quickly become a beloved performer in AEW within this past year, and with Sting possibly beside him, that'll just boost his value even more.
Yeah, I pulled up my email earlier, and Pro Wrestling Tees, you mentioned them. They put in their big email blast they sent out, obviously to try to get people to buy the shirt. It seems a lot of people listen, because it is a new record, according to Pro Wrestling Tees, for the most shirts sold in 24 hours on their website. So that tells you all you need to know right there, because I have a feeling, I'm trying to think back of maybe what some of the biggest ones would have been before. Maybe there were some, but again, I couldn't even tell you what that would be. But still, I mean, that's significant, because we know, like, Pro Wrestling Tees, that's the place to go to get your stuff. And so, pretty outstanding there. And that's what we talked about sort of with the buzz last night. And you and I kept saying, man, we got a lot of people in the chat. Like, a lot of people want to talk about this show. And that's why I think that this rating, once it does come out, I think it's going to be pretty interesting, because there were a lot of eyeballs, I think, on AEW at that point once you saw the Sting stuff, and I'd be very curious to see how many people kind of hung around for the main event. But, some other things I was thinking of is, you talked about the Darby Allin thing. We kind of discussed like the wrestler versus manager role for Sting, and I think it's significant to just think, because, AEW is a newer company, and I think people have to remember that sometimes, because it's easy to forget. Like, you can if this was, I don't know, a company that's 25 years in or something, that's maybe doing different stuff and maybe bringing back some of these guys, and you're saying, well, we've seen this before, which I think some people get that feeling with WWE when they bring back some of these guys and such. But at the same time, like, this is a company that's not old at all. Like, it's not even, it's fairly new. And so I think you have to understand that they're going to do stuff like this when they get the opportunity. And, we were thinking back to like the Shaq thing and all that was teased a little while back. But now it's like, you bring in someone that has the face value, like anything a wrestling legend what you would want from someone like Sting. Like that immediately raises your profile to a fan base that maybe decided to check out on wrestling. And yes, they're not going to expect the Sting that you got in WCW, 20 years ago. But at the same time, like it's a huge name, and for a new company, you're trying to grow your business. You're trying to grow your ratings. This is one step towards doing that, and we're going to talk about the second step here in a minute. But, I mean, I see some of the backlash, and I understand. Look, if Sting comes out and starts main eventing every show, then I'm going to be right there with you. But I don't see that happening. So I think there's really nothing here for AEW to lose other than the fact that maybe you say, okay, well, some of these younger talent are not going to get as much screen time because Sting's going to be on TV and all this and all that. But I just think it's something where for AEW it's a win-win because it raises your exposure. It gives you an opportunity here to put Sting around some of these guys like Darby Allin, and I just think it's a full positive moving forward, I think, for them.
Yeah, I'm looking at the wrestling interwebs, and it looks like, you just see a lot of people drawing a lot of false equivalencies between what AEW is doing with Sting now and what WWE was doing, with past stars like Goldberg, for example, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of people are really jumping the gun when it comes to that because we haven't really even seen how Sting is going to be presented yet. We saw that segment last night where literally all he did was have, albeit an epic entrance, and then a stare off with a few superstars. But other than that, we haven't really seen what he's going to be doing in AEW. It looks like next week we're going to have Sting speak and maybe get a better idea of what he'll be doing in the company. And you guys will have to check that out on Dissecting Dynamite to see our thoughts on that. But yeah, we haven't quite seen how he's presented. So to make those knee-jerk judgments this early into it, I feel can bring nothing but negatives right now. So I'd say we have to sit back, see what AEW has in store for Sting before we start bringing out the pitchforks and whatnot.
Yeah, and that's what I heard someone mention this, and multiple people did, but it's like, had they brought him out after the main event, like then I would have said, okay, I'm a little worried here because if all of a sudden Sting's walking in and he's going to be challenging Omega, then like sure that's a great dream match, in theory, but at the same time in 2020 it's probably not a match that's going to be a 5-star caliber match. I just don't think it's going to happen. Although I guess if someone could do it, it could be Omega that could bring him to that point. But I think because where they're putting him and because it was in that spot, I just think it made a lot of sense, as we said, because we had already talked about it a month ago, saying, well, we could see why they would do this because with Darby Allin and all these different connections and all that. But no doubt, I mean, Sting coming in, that's the big talk. And it's crazy to think that is the big talk. But at the same time, there was something that happened. And here's what fascinates me, Andy, and I didn't even think about this as we were talking on Dissecting Dynamite, but all of this stuff we're discussing happened in 1 hour. Like, it wasn't throughout this entire 2-hour episode. Like, basically, like, in 1 hour, AEW, like, completely just changed the dynamic here because you had Sting come in, and then you had Kenny Omega win the AEW World Title from Jon Moxley, and now that brings in the aspect of tying in AEW with Impact. Don Callis helps Kenny win the title, and then they run off in the Jacksonville screw job there with Callis saying you're going to have to tune in next Tuesday night, and everybody's like, what the hell, Tuesday? Like, AEW's on Wednesday. Of course he means that they are headed to Impact Wrestling, and man, I just, this opens up so many possibilities, and the more I think about this, the more I love it. Even for people who say this maybe does nothing for AEW, I completely disagree, because they've essentially, to me, Andy, they've blown up the wrestling universe here, in that they have said so many times, we will work with anyone, and I think even Omega was jokingly saying it, like, we would work with WWE if WWE wanted to work with us. Like, that's just kind of where we're at. That'll never happen, but at the same time, like, this opens up those possibilities, and to where now AEW's with Impact. We know Impact has been doing stuff with New Japan, and like, you connect all the dots, and it's just like, man, the possibilities. I guess they're right. They kept saying that, the bridge or gates are open, the bridges are down, whatever. That is essentially the case now.
Yeah, AEW essentially sent out an adrenaline needle to each and every fan watching last night, because effectively that's what it was. I mean, the way my heart was fluttering after we got that announcement, like you said, Don Callis saying Tuesday night, and we had that pause, and oh wait, no, it's Impact. It's just crazy because, as we know, this year has been a tough year for everybody, but definitely in the wrestling industry, the difficulties with the lack of like true live performances and whatnot. But now looking back at it, within the past year, we have AEW, NWA, and now Impact potentially all under the same umbrella, and that's not to mention the other outside ties that they have. Kenny Omega being a top champ over in AAA, Moxley being a champ in New Japan. I mean, the widespread across the wrestling world that AEW is currently putting together is something, something like I've never seen in my wrestling experience. I know, before I truly got into wrestling back in the 90s and whatnot, WCW consistently brought in New Japan performers and
Yep.
things of that nature. Uh, Watching live, I haven't been able to be a part of anything like this. I came in right after the WCW WWF invasion angle and stuff like that, and of course I've gone back retroactively, and I've watched all of that. But seeing it here, seeing it live, seeing it right in front of me unfold is just, it's such an exciting time in wrestling. But what I want to know is, where exactly does Kenny Omega fall in this storyline? Because his build the past few, I mean, it has gone places that we never would have imagined.
I put this out on Twitter, and someone, responded, and they were like, actually, I hadn't thought about this, but this is a really good idea. And I just popped in my head because you talked about sort of the way things used to be. And, people are always comparing different eras and such. But, back in like the territory days, like you're talking about how you had the champion traveling around the different promotions, having different matches, having fresh matches, ones that you hadn't seen before, because you're basically selling to those local audiences, because, you don't have as much television coverage and all that, but you have those local audience that maybe hadn't seen a lot of these guys before, and all of a sudden they're coming in. It's almost like you're seeing someone for the first time. Well, now, if you're doing this stuff with Impact, and let's say eventually this continues to expand, as we said, we've already seen stuff with NWA, Kenny's a champion in AAA, Moxley's a champion in New Japan. If you start expanding with all of those, and all of a sudden you've got wrestlers interchanging and going different places, which that's what I think about, and the more I think about it, it's like, man, this damn pandemic, like, it just had to happen now, right? Because if you take this out of the equation, like, think about all the possibilities with travel and everything you could do with everything. But it almost feels that way. Like, I would love to see a situation where, like, all of a sudden Kenny Omega's going around. He's kind of being that guy saying, hey, I'm the AEW champion. Like, I'm the champion. Like, I don't care if you're the Impact champion. I don't care if you're, New Japan, whatever. Like, I've got the belt. And then all of a sudden, like, just having him travel around different shows, being that champion again, that's going to be easier said than done given the current limitations and the restrictions. But I think in a perfect scenario, that's what I'd love to see, because it raises everybody's profile. It gives you different matches. It puts you in a situation where, you could have Kenny Omega versus Jon Moxley on AEW, or you could have Kenny Omega go over and, face Rich Swann on Impact, or go somewhere else, to wherever and face someone else. It's just, I think it opens up so many different things they could do. And I wish, again, there were not so many restrictions in place, because I'd love to see, Omega as sort of that old school Ric Flair, whoever else, back in the territory days, traveling around, going in and saying, hey, I'm the champ. Like, who do you have here that can actually face me and give me a challenge? That's sort of that old school thinking and old school booking. But it feels like AEW at least looks at that and says, hey, I mean, we've got these potential partnerships. We know what we're doing here, and just the fact that we're going to have Omega on Impact in some form or fashion, it's pretty crazy to think about.
Right, and just from like a characterization or like a story building standpoint, you look at where Kenny Omega has come from as well. I mean, he has this clearly documented history with that bastard, that con artist, that carny, Don Callis, and then in the past few weeks, he's been lamenting about how in the past year he hasn't been seen, he hasn't been presented as this top star in AEW. He hasn't been viewed as the best in the world, as the best bout machine that he knows he is. So what does he do? He has this great friend, this great colleague in this other company, a company that maybe would give him the respect that he deserves, that being Impact. And that brings up a whole bunch of other questions. I mean, we were talking about like who attacked Jon Moxley, and yeah, we were throwing around Kenta, we were throwing around Hangman, but now we're looking online and we're seeing a complete 180 in terms of predictions. Now we're seeing Don Callis, we're hearing Gallows and Anderson. I mean, think about that, a potential reformation of the Bullet Club on
Yes.
American soil. I mean, the options are limitless. But like, where do we go from here? Is it a full-on invasion angle? Will Kenny Omega be the territory hopping champion of old? I mean, like, and then you just think of, I mean, like, just some base level dream matchups that we have with Impact versus AEW. I mean, it's, I mean, I just off the top of my head, I mean, I'm a tag match fiend, so I'm thinking, I mean, like the North versus FTR, the North versus the Young Bucks versus Motor City Machine Guns, Motor City Machine Guns versus FTR, Motor City Machine Guns versus Private Party, the Good Brothers versus the Young Bucks. I mean, I'm going crazy here, but like, are there any matchups AEW versus Impact that are really just raising some goosebumps on you right now?
Well, the ones I think about, and you ran off all those matches. It almost reminds me of our friend Hulk Hogan joining the Dissecting Dynamite show last night, because he was fired up, man. Like he was,
Yeah.
I could only imagine the matches. Like he may throw himself in there when you think about it. Like he may say, "All right, brother, like Hogan versus Omega, let's do it, like right now. Like let's get it on in the middle of the ring." But
I mean,
yes,
with Impact, he has a history of doing so.
Listen,
So we'll see.
hey, if you want to check out Hulk Hogan's cameo appearance from Dissecting Dynamite, just check out the link in the show notes. You'll see exactly what we're talking about. But he was fired up. But I think about some of those matchups. I love Sue Young. Like I think her entrance, just her character is just unreal. Like can you think about like Sue Young versus Abaddon? Like what an unbelievably strange, like, oh my goodness, just the entrances alone would have me just in complete fear of what could potentially take place. So I'd love to see that. You and I were kind of joking about, you put like Abaddon together with like Bray Wyatt and the Fiend or something. Like there's just Abaddon's such a unique character that I'd love to see stuff like that. But then again, like you look at that whole women's division, like Deonna Purrazzo versus literally anyone. Like you think about sort of the characters. I'd love to see like Deonna Purrazzo team up with Britt Baker or something. Like there's just so many different type of characters that you have on display. And look, I think this is good for the AEW women's division too. You and I have spent a lot of time talking about this and saying, if there's that one kind of spot that clearly there is room for improvement, it's the AEW women's division. And then you look over at Impact, and it's like you do have Deonna Purrazzo, you do have Sue Young, you have others, you have Jordan Grace, you've got go up and down the line. Like there's a lot of possibilities, and there are a lot of interesting matchups. And I think this is where this helps AEW in a sense, because we talk about like what are the benefits for AEW. I mean, aside from the fact, like we said, that you just bring about so many different potentially fresh matchups, you have talent interchanging, all this other stuff. But I think with the women's division, if you have a lot of these different possibilities you can do, and then I also think about this. We talk about this Impact thing, and AEW Dark's on Tuesday nights. But so is Impact, which you and I kind of talked about, and I was like, please make this a short AEW Dark next week, because I would love to be able to watch Impact live. I love covering AEW Dark, but at the same time, like, I want to see what happens here. But what do you do with that? Like, I'm very interested to see, because AEW's roster is so big that, I'm curious to maybe what they decide to do. We've talked about them getting another show in the future. Tony Khan has basically all but said it's going to happen, and I assume it's going to be in 2021 at some point. But it does, like, it opens up so many different things you can do here. And, you talk about the dream matches and all these different matches you could see, and just kind of mixing talent in and out. I think that, here's what I think the next 6 months are going to be very interesting, because, we talk about it within the scope of the pandemic, the vaccine, everything like that, like to where if you get back to somewhat being normal, where you can run your company, you can bring talent in and out without having that in the back of your mind, always thinking, okay, well, we get 2 or 3 positive tests here, it's going to completely shut us down or something, and all of a sudden you've got an outbreak, all these different situations. You get fans back in the building and all. I mean, just think about that. Like, think about having a full arena of fans. And that's what you and I kind of talked about with, like, the Undertaker farewell, and now with Sting's debut, they had enough people there to where it sounded great. But, I mean, think about that in front of a full crowd. Like, I think once you get back to that, it's just going to really change a lot of dynamics in terms of what they're going to be able to do here.
Oh, without a doubt, without a doubt. I was closing my eyes last night after the show, just trying to picture what that pop would have been like if they had a full arena with Sting coming out, or even or even the gasp, the sound that we would hear from the crowd when we heard Don Callis say, "Oh, you'll see on Tuesday. Tune into Access TV." I mean, they said Access TV on TNT. I mean, but yeah, just the gasp in general that we would have felt from the crowd. But yeah, like you said, endless opportunity here. Of course, there's always the risk of having the deep roster that AEW already has being kind of put on the back burner with other potential dream matchups here. But if that means we may get like Moxley versus Callahan, or Omega versus Eddie Edwards, or like Sammy Guevara versus TJP or something like that, then so be it. If that means some of the AEW roster needs to go on the back burner for a couple months during this angle, then that's a sacrifice I am willing to make. But yeah, you look at the endless opportunities here, and it's just a very exciting time in wrestling. And once we do start getting fans in the arenas again, I'm sure we'll feel that excitement permeating through our television, because I know I had tickets to an AEW show here in St. Louis back in April of this year. It's currently rescheduled to I believe June of 2021. We'll see if we hit that date or not. But yeah, I'm excited to get in there with my new Sting T-shirt and stand in the rafters as we see Sting make that epic entrance again with some snowfall.
A live Dissecting Dynamite on location. That would be there you go. That's the next big step for us.
Exactly.
So no, that would be a lot of fun. And yeah, it is, man. It's interesting to think about just kind of what they could do with this. And I think that's the thing. It's right now we're in that stage where it's like we don't know what they're going to do. We just know kind of the first point in a very long story, we feel like, to this point. So I don't know. I'm curious to think. And, I also think about, you talk about, AEW's got, I mean, they've got a big roster. But it's like on AEW Dark, we've seen them bring in a lot of these sort of, unsigned talents, and they've had them there for a while. And I'm curious, when things go back to normal, or at least close to normal as they can get, what does that look like? Like, how do they switch things up with their roster? Like, what do you do here in terms of maybe having that many people? Obviously a lot of these people may go back, and some of these independent promotions, we don't know what that's going to look like. But I'm very curious to see what that does. And something else I was just thinking about. I'm also very curious to see, like, and I don't know, maybe the answer is very simple, and most people probably think it is, but like, does WWE, like, do they do anything different from this? Like, does anything change in terms of maybe them looking at it? Because again, let's say, and we're playing this game right now because, as we said, we don't know what the rating is. But let's say, like, they do 1 million, or let's say even like they do 1.2, like AEW does 1.2 or something like that. Like, just anything over 1 million, to where it's a point where it's like, okay, you've got a buzz around here that is certainly through the roof. And let's think about this. Like, NXT, they have NXT TakeOver War Games like this weekend. Like, I mean, look, I'm not saying that, like, I'm looking forward to the show. I think there's going to be some good matches. But after this AEW, like, you have to believe, like, the buzz for that show is maybe not as high outside of just your NXT regulars. So I'm very curious just to see maybe what, I mean, because we know, like, WWE, they're really not working with a lot of people, and people say that, but at the same time, you look at the WWE network, and it's like, okay, well, they've got all these independent promotions on there you can watch, and, like, they've at least brought that aspect to it somewhat. But I'm just very curious, maybe, I don't know, and I guess people have always said, Vince McMahon changing his mind and doing things different, like, it just seems like we go through the same phase year after year after year now. But I'm curious, maybe, I don't know, like, WWE, again, is not the one to react to something like this, and obviously they're not going to do anything just blatant to, like, straightforward say or react to anything that's happened here, but I'm very curious to see maybe what their business model looks like here moving forward. I mean, aside from the fact they're going to continue bringing in money, they've got all these deals with television, and they have nothing to worry about money-wise, but I don't know. Maybe I'm thinking too much into this, but I'm just curious to see kind of what happens just with the whole wrestling industry moving forward, which obviously WWE is a big part of that.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. I may be speaking out of an AEW bubble right now, but I've seen maybe 1.5 posts regarding the ladder match on NXT last night compared to the
Right.
1,000 posts I've seen about the thing with Sting, the Impact announcement, things of that nature. But you look at WWE and the way that they've that they've kind of opened themselves up to some independent promotions over the past few years, whether it be featuring them on the network or even lending out their superstars to what have basically become like a farming system, like over at like Evolve and things of that nature. Uh, and you got to ask yourself, will that broadening continue happening in WWE based upon the success that we might see between AEW and Impact here? I mean, when you get down to it, it's all business. But the thing about Vince is that he's spent a lifetime trying to build a wrestling monopoly. First buying up the territory promotions, eventually defeating WCW and being the top dog for nearly 20 years now. I don't know if it's in his game plan to bend over to these other companies
Yeah.
and allow them into the mix or not. It may be something that we'd have to wait for until new people come in charge, until maybe
Yeah.
I don't know, until maybe Triple H and Stephanie take full charge of it. I mean, I can't speak on their business practices because obviously they are a multi-billion-dollar company and they know what they're doing. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if they mix it up and continue broadening their reach across independent promotions the way that we've kind of seen them been doing over the past few years.
Yeah, and that's why we talk about this. Is we're not saying this to knock on WWE. It's just like this is a significant shift in terms of how the wrestling industry is operating, given what AEW is doing here. And it's almost like they almost need to do it because out of necessity. Like they don't have what WWE has. They don't have the history. They don't have the resources to that extent. With all these just mega everything they've got coming in from a financial standpoint. And so I think it's always interesting to look at that. And I think most people kind of look at, WWE has said it many times, like they're the entertainment company, like they're sports entertainment. AEW is, we're wrestling, like we're kind of appealing to that wrestling audience. Whereas, WWE, it is more entertainment based type stuff now, it seems. But, I think about that and just sort of, I don't know, maybe this has just got you thinking about a lot of different things in the whole wrestling industry. And I think it goes back to what we said, in that you can complain all you want about different things, but I just, it's been a while since I think we've had a period like this now, especially where you have all these choices, you have all these options out there in terms of what you can watch. And, I think that's what we talk about, like with the ratings and everything. Why are the ratings down? Well, there's so many other options you have. But at the same time, like, man, you've got a lot of interesting things that can happen here. And especially with this AEW Impact thing, knowing that Impact, has worked with New Japan. You've got TJP, Chris Bay, they're in the Super J Cup. So you connect all those dots. And I don't know, it does. It opens up those possibilities, and I think that's a good thing to be talking about because, at a point there, which not long ago, it was WWE, and that felt like it was it for the most part for a lot of people, like North American wrestling fans, for a while there, because even when Impact was doing its thing, like Impact was still kind of at a level where it was a lot of people remembering the faults of Impact and kind of what they've done over the years to kind of set themselves where, they may take a step forward, but they take two steps back. As you and I have talked about, I think Impact Wrestling during this pandemic especially, they may have not gotten the recognition just because of that. Like I think a lot of people still kind of have that stigma over them, kind of the steps they've taken backwards over the years. But it's actually been a really good show, and so I think this maybe opens up some of those things and maybe kind of lets people see a little bit more outside of just the WWE bubble or just outside of the AEW bubble, really for the most part when you think about it. So I think that's the thing we should be talking about here is that. Yes, you can like WWE if you like WWE. You can like AEW if you like AEW. But I think for the wrestling industry as a whole, this is a very good thing because it brings about lots of different options. It doesn't feel stale, and it just, I think, gives fans something that they can really sink their teeth into, knowing that it's been a while since we've been able to say, like, dream matches and stuff, right? And even if they're not, the old-school dream matches of Austin versus Hogan or anything like that, it's still like this feels fresh, this feels new, and I think that's the biggest thing you can say about this moving forward.
Yeah, I mean anything that brings eyes to other promotions, just giving people the exposure that they deserve and whatnot. It's very, very exciting, and I think I think that's really what we have to look at. Like what type of exposure will this bring to Impact? How many more viewers will they have on their Twitch stream this upcoming Tuesday? How many more viewers will they have on Access? What type of ratings are they going to do? And I feel that's also how we're really going to see what AEW's influence in the wrestling industry is. I mean, if we see like a major spike in Impact numbers, then that shows what AEW can do, what value that they can bring to other promotions. And who knows, maybe that's the stepping stone that they need in order to get New Japan, or maybe they already have stuff in New Japan organized, sitting in the background right now, waiting for Kenta to make that surprise appearance. Because from what we've seen, uh, literally anything can happen with with this situation with AEW right now. And if Impact is that missing puzzle piece to get AEW and New Japan working together, then that's a stepping stone I'm looking forward to. I'm telling you that.
Yeah, I am too. I just think there's a lot of ways you could go, and as we said, you had Okada mentioned a lot. During that Excalibur brought up Okada, and during the main event and all this other stuff. So I don't know. There's just there's a lot of ways you can go with this. I think a lot of people like Orange Cassidy versus Toriano. Give me that. Give me that kind of match. I'm all in for that. And I don't know, like Sting versus Okada. When that starts happening, then we'll know we've made it, right, Andy? Because that's the dream match in 2020. Sting, Okada, Omega, triple threat match for the AEW title. There you go.
See, I'm thinking of Sting versus Orange Cassidy and who can sell the most T-shirts match. How about that?
Hey, you did see my guy John Silver already trying to recruit Sting into the Dark Order. So that's why he's my boy, because he already knows, look, he's got to jump on the hot topics right away. And as soon as Sting came out, I think John Silver sent out a tweet, asking him basically, hey, come on over to the Dark Order. So Dark Order could be getting multiple new members here with Sting and Hangman Page.
Hey, and with Eric Young over in Impact, he's a shoe-in for the Dark Order. So we'll see what else they can do.
We will see, indeed. But Andy, this was fun. As we said, we did Dissecting Dynamite, and we just basically had to react on the fly to all the craziness that had just hit us, basically right as the show had ended. But this was fun to kind of look back and think, kind of moving forward now, what could happen with a lot of this, because there are so many different moving parts, and I think it opens up so many questions, which, as we've talked about here for 30 minutes, it's like a lot of the stuff we talked about is basically hypothetical. We could see this happening. Maybe this happens. Maybe it doesn't happen. But I think the fact that we're thinking about it and we're not just going through that weekly grind of saying, okay, well, here's another show. Like, let's go wait for the next show, and then we'll wait for the next show, and then we'll wait for the next show. It's like, wait a second, like, I can't wait for the next show. Like, what's going to happen on Tuesday? And then what's going to happen on Wednesday? So I have to give AEW credit. You can point out some of the flaws. You can point out some of the things maybe they've done well, some of the things they haven't done so well since they've started. But this feels like that one thing that has a chance to, as Tony Khan said several weeks ago, people pointed out and joked about the tweet about the balance and power shifting and all that. Like, this feels like a shift in terms of kind of what wrestling is capable of in 2020 as a whole, as an industry. And I think that's probably the biggest takeaway here, is that it's shifting. I'm not saying that all of a sudden WWE is just going to go for a downward spiral here, but this at least feels like a freshening up of the wrestling industry from a point that, again, dream matches, possible opponents. Like for Kenny Omega, what does he do? Does he travel around? Once the restrictions are lifted, what then become the possibilities? I think that's something that really has us excited.
And see, I don't know a lot of things, but what I do know is that this upcoming Tuesday, I'm going to have my dual monitors, and I'm going to have AEW Dark on one screen, and I'm going to have Impact on the other screen. And I think when I sit back and think, what do I want out of the wrestling industry? That's all I want. I want to be able to use my dual monitors.
Yep, that's what I will be doing as well. I'll have the AEW Dark review over at 411. Jeremy Thomas will have our Impact Wrestling review over there as well, and I'm sure he's got to be excited too, because it's like, man, we're getting this, and again, Impact's already been a good show, so now you get this very interesting thought of what could happen there on that show. But Andy, as always, enjoyed it. Let everybody know what all you've got going on. We teased a bit of it in the last episode of the podcast. Of course, we'll have the link to the Dissecting Dynamite show we did on Wednesday night in the show notes as well, but to let everybody know everything else you got going on there.
Yeah, catch me Wednesday nights on Dissecting Dynamite over at the 411 Mania YouTube channel. While you're at it, make sure you like all of our videos and subscribe. We're also going to be having some cool content out on that YouTube channel coming out very soon. We have a mini documentary about Kurt Angle and his departure from WWE, joining TNA back in 2006, which is more relevant than ever with what we've seen with Sting as of late. So we have that coming up for you. And then if you want to hear my thoughts throughout the week, I just joined Twitter last month, so make sure you go give me a follow at Andy_P_Perez. That's Perez. And I'd love to hear from you guys.
Yep, we'll put Andy's Twitter link in the show notes as always, too. So check that out. Check out all the great stuff we have there on the 411 YouTube channel. And Andy, again, enjoyed it, and enjoy getting ready for Impact and AEW next week, because it sounds like there'll be quite a couple shows for sure.
Yep, going to be a busy week. Thanks for having me, Blake. It was a pleasure as always.
Thanks again to 411's Andy Perez for joining us here on the podcast. Again, be sure to check out our Dissecting Dynamite discussion we had right after AEW Dynamite went off the air on Wednesday night with our immediate reaction to everything, and we kind of expanded on that here in this podcast. Check out everything there on Dissecting Dynamite and all the great stuff we have on the 411 YouTube channel. Andy mentioned he's got a Kurt Angle mini documentary coming out. I had a chance to be a part of that. It's a really cool thing to look at, his insight into just this entire story of Kurt Angle joining TNA, and he talked to a lot of great people for this thing, including Dave Meltzer. Dave Meltzer gave some really great insight into kind of looking at Angle making that jump from WWE to TNA. So that's a really cool feature. I would highly recommend you check out. So subscribe to the YouTube channel to check that out once it's up. And then again, for everything else, check out 411mania.com. Lots of great coverage over there for everything. We know our live coverage of AEW, WWE, and of course Impact Wrestling, which is going to be probably a much talked about show next Tuesday. So check all that out at 411mania.com. And as always, we'll have the link to the GoFundMe for Larry Zonka's family in the show notes. So continue to share that if you can, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast, any podcast app you use. Just search for 411 on wrestling, and you can find me on Twitter for everything else at WrestleBlake. Thanks as always for listening to the podcast, and stay safe, and we'll talk to you next time here on 411 on Wrestling Podcast.